Well, welcome to Searching the Sacred. We are here in a different kind of series than we have done before, and we are so excited to be in the midst of these conversations. Have been so rich and beautiful. And what we are doing is talking about women that exist across multiple faith traditions, and we are reading their stories from our faith traditions, and we are learning from them and learning from one another and expanding our view of each other and of the divine as we do that. And so as we do on Searching the Sacred, we are going to start with readings from the sacred text, but that means we're going to now start with multiple readings. And so today we are talking about the Queen of Sheba, and we are going to begin by hearing two different segments about her from the Quran, and then we are going to hear from the Jewish tradition, and then we're going to hear from the Christian tradition, and then we will introduce ourselves and who has just shared. So let's begin with the Quran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إني وجدت امرأة تملكهم وأوتيت من كل شيء ولها عرش عظيم وجدتها وقومها يسجدون للشمس من دون الله وزين لهم الشيطان عالمهم فصدهم عن السبيل فهم لا يهتدون. The section that I chose to read from, it's when King Solomon, Sulaiman alayhi salam, is asking one of the birds that is missing from his assembly, and the bird comes and reports that it was not, the bird is saying now, I have found out something you do not know, have just come from Saba or Sheba with news. Indeed, I found a woman ruling over them who has been given everything she needs and who has a magnificent throne. I found her and her people prostrating to the sun instead of Allah, for Satan has made their deeds appealing to them, hindering them from the right way and leaving them unguided. So they do not prostrate to Allah, who brings forth what is hidden in the heavens and the earth, and knows what you all conceal and what you reveal. He is Allah, there is no God worthy of worship except Him, the Lord of the mighty throne.
Thank you.
I'm also going to be reading from a chapter called Namal. It's the verses 32 to 35, and it specifically talks about the Queen of Sheba when she is talking to her chiefs. She said, "O chiefs, advise me in this matter of mine, for I would never make any decisions without you." They responded, "We are a people of strength and great military might, but the decision is yours, so decide what you will command." She reasoned, "Indeed, when kings invade a land, they ruin it and debase its nobles. They really do so. But I will certainly send him a gift and see what response my envoys will return with."
Thank you. Now from the Jewish tradition.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of a preface to the text I'm about to read. The rabbis of the Talmud, which is an important Jewish text, were seemingly confused by the existence of not just a queen, but also a queen that seems to have her own power. And so in a discussion of the Queen of Sheba, they said this. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol ha'omer Malkat Sheva isha haita, Eino ela toe. My Malkat Sheva, Malchuta dishva. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yochanan said, anyone who says that the Queen of Sheba is in reference to a woman is incorrect. That is an error. Why does it say Malkat Sheva, Queen of Sheba? Because of the Malchuta dishva, because of the kingdom of Shva.
Okay. Now from the Christian tradition.
I am reading from 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. When the queen of Sheba heard reports about Solomon due to the Lord's name, she came to test him with riddles. Accompanying her to Jerusalem was a huge entourage with camels carrying spices, a large amount of gold, and precious stones. After she arrived, she told Solomon everything that was on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too difficult for him to answer. When the queen of Sheba saw how wise Solomon was, the palace he had built, the food on his table, the servants' quarters, the function and dress of his attendants, his cupbearers, and the entirely burned offerings that he offered at the Lord's temple, it took her breath away.
Well, I feel like once we read from the text, I just have 1,000 questions already swirling. So we'll see where this conversation goes. But we're going to begin by introducing ourselves to each other and to our listeners. So if you would, please share your name, share your pronouns, what faith tradition you come from, how you would describe that, and then what, if anything, you grew up hearing or learning about the Queen of Sheba. And then we'll expand that into how we're seeing her today, once we get going. So let's go in the same order.
Greetings of peace. I am Talat Alia Siddiqui. You can look me up as Coach Alia on the social media. I belong to the faith of Islam. I came to Islam later part of my life, so I didn't grow up with stories of the scripture. So whatever I have learned is through the Ribat Institute and through my own digging.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Fozia. I am also a Muslim. I am a graduate of the Rabata Institute, and I teach local women's circles here in Austin. And surprisingly, I did not come into the practice myself until later in my life, but I knew about the Queen of Sheba because of the fact that Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam was able to control jinns, and jinns in the Islamic tradition are and invisible spiritual beings. They're kind of like a separate category of creation that have their own free will. They're not demons or anything. And so there was a lot of fascination with that. And so I grew up knowing a lot about Queen of Sheba, surprisingly.
Okay, well, we're going to have to explore more about that once we get going too. Wilhelmina.
Hi, I am Rabbi Wilhelmina Davidson. I am a Jewish educator, etc. And I am a rabbi, so I am Jewish. And when it comes to background with Queen of Sheba, actually, within a Jewish context, I haven't had so much of an interaction. Preparing for this actually was probably most within a Jewish context, but I did spend part of my childhood in a Christian church. And so in that context, I was exposed a little to this idea of the Queen of Sheba as like a tricky kind of character, and then also National Geographic, where they were trying to figure out who is this person.
That is one of the questions, I think. Who is this person? But National Geographic is an interesting source. Rachel.
I am Rachel Pye Jones, and I come from a Christian Protestant tradition. And I really didn't grow up hearing anything about the Queen of Sheba. But then I spent 20 years living abroad in a Muslim majority context. And so I started learning the Quran, and I saw her story there was different and expansive and unique, and I was super curious about it. So then I went to seminary a couple of years ago, and one of my first papers I wrote was a comparative study of the Queen of Sheba in Islam and Christian traditions. And so that kind of blew open my mind in terms of questions to keep asking. I don't feel like I figured anything out, but at least I started to learn about her, and I think she's fascinating to me. So I'm excited to learn from you all about her.
I'm Lisa. I co-lead 40 Orchards with Steph, co-host the podcast. I guess I've got a long history of traditions, but like right now I would say I'm an interreligious chaplain. I work with folks who are justice impacted, justice involved. And this, I I really was trying to figure out, like, I don't know. I know the name. I have zero recollection of like placing her inside of the text, which is an interesting, like, she's very familiar and yet I know nothing of the text.
Mm-hmm. That's a great segue to mine, because same thing. I feel like isn't she in movies and things? She's like a mystery that's sort of out there. But so I'm Stephanie, and I co-lead and co-host this podcast with Lisa, and also come from the Christian tradition. And I think I don't really remember learning about her. I think that's true. I think I knew she was there, but she was just this sort of mysterious figure, and I think there's a lot then to learn and explore today. And one of the things I'm curious about for all of us is whether it seems in our tradition that she is held in a positive light or a negative light or neutral, because that becomes an interesting part of the conversation. Is sometimes these characters are held differently in our different traditions, and especially was sparked, Wilhelmina, by the fact that you read this thing in the Talmud of like, well, certainly she wasn't a queen, and I'm like, oh, that's really curious to me. So, what would you say about kind of how you have in the past, or how currently today you're seeing this character, negatively, positively? What is another adjective you would even use in those two? What comes to mind? Alia, you look ready to talk about that.
So it's very interesting, when Wilhelmina shared that, she didn't exist, because there's a section in the Quran, a whole surah called Saba. So for the people of Saba, and how those people, were very blessed. They had, gardens and, rivers and, safety and all of those things. But then, they were misguided. And then this part where Queen of Sheba is referred to, this is where they're worshiping the sun. They're not worshiping the one God. And it's reported to, Solomon or Suleiman alayhi salam. So he writes, to her, and that's the section that Fawzia was reading, that, she's asking her chieftains that, what do you think of it? This letter starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, who's most merciful and most gracious. So what is this? Should I go? And then she decides to, as Fawzia read, give some gifts. But of course, Sulaiman alayhi salam is like, I already have everything that you can imagine, because he had, this vast kingdom of animals and jinn and so many powers. But the interesting thing is that she was the queen that was reported to him, that there is this place called Saba, and then the queen rules over them, and the queen has a magnificent throne. So she has a lot of power, and she has like these things. So it's interesting, in the Quran, it's like in great detail. So Sulaiman alayhi salam says, okay, I'm inviting her, but I want her throne to be brought, here before she arrives. So one of the people in his kingdom, he said, I can bring it in the blink of an eye. So they bring the throne and they set it up and they disguise it. So when she comes, it's like, is this your throne, or is your throne like this? And she's saying, it looks to be the same. But, so she's very confused as to, is this her throne? How could it be here before she even arrived? So there's this miracle. So she's, now Quran talks about how she's like, her mind is changing, like the first the letter, then, then the whole refusal of the gifts, because, this king has everything. And then this mention of the one God, and then this miracle of her throne brought, and then it said to her, enter the palace. But when she saw the hall, she thought it was a body of water. So she bared her legs. So Solomon says, it is just a palace paved with crystal. And she declared, "My Lord, I have certainly wronged myself. Now I fully submit myself along with Suleiman to Allah, the Lord of the world." So this little, like, it's not a little story. It's like very significant that what changed her mind. So, imagine this powerful woman who has an entire kingdom, and she comes here and her throne is already there, so like she's already kind of submitting to the power that is beyond what she thought was. And then this little detail about her pulling up her skirt and bared her ankles because she thought it was water on the floor. And it wasn't water, it was crystal. So tradition has it that it was a floor of crystal, but underneath it was water. So she thought that she's going to step into water. So she kind of, lifted her dress. So I thought it was a really cute detail that, she lifts her, like she exposes herself a little,
Well, especially this has come up in some of our episodes of how interesting it is what is and isn't given space in our text, and why certain things are described and certain other things are not described. And so to take that amount of time for that detail seems really and compelling. And I'm curious to compare that, Wilhelmina, to, like, you really felt like you wanted to read from the Talmud today. And I'm curious of the contrast now with, like, how you would describe your tradition's holding of Queen of Sheba as compared to what Alia just described.
Yeah, she seems to either A, be completely dismissed, as we saw, where they can't conceive of her being the singular ruler, or they use her, and I'm sure lots has been written on this in terms of patriarchy, but they use her to kind of build up King Solomon as this great wise character, and so she seems to largely be serving that purpose. Even in the biblical text, in the Tanakh, she seems to also be kind of fulfilling this role. She's like, I'm a little bit of a trickster. I'm going to test him with some riddles. And then she ends up being like, "You're great. You're awesome. Here's a bunch of great stuff. Let's do business."
Fozia, you look like you have something to respond to in that.
I wanted to say, for me, the story of the Queen of Sheba is about leadership. Like, a very positive, like how a woman leader is behaving. And she is not someone who's emotional and she's like, "I got the military power and let's crush Solomon alayhi salam." She's like, no, we're going to wait. We're not going to rush into war. We are going to have a council. She calls all of her chiefs. She says that, what are we going to do about this? I got this letter. And, in the Quran, we say that, we see that she's like, her council people tell her that, yeah, we have a great military. Can we beat them? Probably, yeah, but the decision is yours. And I think that she is very caring. She's very, she's thinking about the people that, okay, if we are going to fight the army of Solomon, what's going to happen to my people? What's going to happen to us? So, and she's not in that ego phase, like, oh, let's crush them. Let's show them who we are. Very diplomatic. And they tell her, like, we're going to leave this to you. And I think this is like an extremely positive example of women leadership in Quran. She has a voice, she consults, and she makes a decision.
I love that contrast too, to just notice how we can read a text so differently, even in its similarities, of that idea of, like, it can be seen as a negative thing. Oh, she's just there to prop up Solomon. But even there, you could see some of the lessons that you were just describing of what is it to actually be a leader. And what she's also doing, even as she's propping up Solomon in the Tanakh, is avoiding war. And can we see that positive as well? And how are we reading her actions in our text, and how are we bringing those things forward? And I'm curious, Rachel, I know you've done a lot of study on her as well. And I'm curious about what you think about her relationship with Solomon as it comes out in 1 Kings 10.
Well, there's three words kind of playing around in my head, and I think they're from each of the things people have brought out so far. And one is the idea of leadership that she's demonstrating. The other one is cleverness that Wilhelmina mentioned, of just coming with this, whether it's to test him or to trick him or just to kind of engage in an intellectual kind of peer-to-peer conversation. I like thinking about her like that. And that, I mean, they spent weeks and months even together having so much to talk about. So clearly they're on equal footing intellectually, I think. And so then that speaks to her wisdom that she has and that she expresses. And so those are the three things: wisdom, leadership, and cleverness that are kind of sparking in my mind. And one thing that, like, in my tradition, she's been kind of neutral. She hasn't been elevated or denigrated, just kind of mostly ignored, which I find quite shocking, because actually she's one of three women that Jesus references in the Gospels of the Hebrew Scriptures. There's only three women that he mentions, and one of them is the Queen of Sheba for her wisdom. And so why do we then, as Christians, when our primary person or prophet, whatever, Jesus, referenced her, we just ignore her? It feels like that shouldn't happen.
Could you find that section and read it and add it to our conversation? Do you know
the part in the Gospels?
Yeah,
sure. So carry on.
we'll come back around to it. Yeah, I'm curious about that sort of. What do you think it is that has allowed her to be seen as this positive leader figure in the Muslim tradition that seems different from other like, what do you think that what would you source that as being from? Do you have a sense?
Really, it's news to me, because this is my first time that I'm realizing that she is not set up in such esteem as I have always, known her as. My best friend is called Sheba because her dad was so inspired by, this Queen of Sheba. So he named her Sheba, but there's this confusion that Sheba is the place, not the queen. There's the section that Fawzia was referring to, that is like leadership. She even says that when kings come through, they have, they cause destruction. So she's even mentioning that this, the kings have done that, but she's the queen and she's going to do things differently. So it's not only women leadership, I think just leadership in general, how it's portrayed that, taking counsel, deliberating on taking action, and then negotiating. So those are all like really great qualities for any leader, let alone, a woman leader. And she's the only queen, like the other women in the Quran. They're held in high esteem for different reasons, for faith or for, perseverance and things like that. But she is really set up on high esteem because of her kingdom and, her power.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very clever, like Rachel had said, because when she decides to send gifts to Solomon, and he rejects them, she gets it that he does not want like political power. He wants something more. And so as a leader, for her to go to Solomon, it shows again she's had political wisdom, that sharpness. And I think that for us as Muslim, Quran, in my opinion, is not a book about gender, whether men are better or women are better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, represents stories that we can take things from, whether they are men or women, good men, good women, bad women. And for us, in the Muslim faith and tradition, Queen Sheba is like one of the prime examples of what good leadership looks like. She could have chosen to be like, oh yeah, bring it on, Solomon, alayhi salam, let's see what you got, right? She's like, no, I'm not doing any of that. And the fact that she's so smart, I always think that she's so smart. She's like, let's send him a gift first. And then when she figures out that he doesn't want like a political power, if he wants something more, all of a sudden she's on her way there to meet it. And think about it, like even in our present world, when presidents, kings, queens, prime ministers, they meet each other, something serious is happening.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, do you have the verse for us?
I do, and yeah. Luke 11:33 and 32, the people that Jesus is talking to, they were seeking signs. And he says to them, when the crowds grew, Jesus said, "This generation is an evil generation. It looks for a sign, but no sign will be given it except Jonah's sign. Just as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so the human one will be a sign to this generation. The queen of the south," and that's the queen of Sheba, "the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them, because she came from a distant land to hear Solomon's wisdom. And look, someone greater than Solomon is here."
Mm. I'm curious, Wilhelmina, about that energy of, in general in the Tanakh, it seems like when an outsider comes in there and wants to hear, that would be a positive thing. Or I'm noticing in First Kings that she's blessing and she's bringing gifts. And I'm curious, when you think about people showing up in the Tanakh and blessing someone and bringing gifts to someone, how that would tend to be seen in that character in general, and then here in the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things I'll say in general, it's good form to bring gifts when you visit people. And I think that's part of being a good guest. And also, oftentimes we see these outside characters doing things like this that have a divine role or a prophetic role, something of that sort. They know something more than we as the reader do, and and that thing is essentially moving them to act. And I think in this case in particular, the fact that the the chapter starts off by saying that she's heard about him and she was curious about him, we're getting a bit more motivation. It's not just an interest in establishing trade, it's also an interest in satiating her curiosity, which I think is wonderful. And the fact that she is seemingly a good guest and Solomon a good host, I think that kind of exemplifies this like lovely relationship that they are having.
And one in a lovely way that helps us see her as a queen and an elevated leader, as we've already said, but also as a human who is, I love that framework of she's a good guest and he's a good host. And that's also something we can learn from, whether in leadership or not. When we're hearing about someone, are we approaching them with curiosity? Are we approaching them with blessing? Are we approaching them with gifts?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I have a question for Wilhelmina. The text that you read from the Tanakh, were they arguing that the Queen of Sheba was a man, or were they arguing that she didn't exist as a person? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So the piece of the Talmud that I brought, it's a little vague. I'll be honest. It's not entirely clear what they mean by saying that it's not Malkat Sheva, but Malchuta de Sheva, Queen of Sheba versus Kingdom of Sheba. But I did find some commentary on this piece of Talmud that explains that the concern seems to be that they don't want to, that it's not the way of kingdoms for women to be the one that's in charge. Normally, and I suppose historically, in some ways, this is true. We can observe this. Normally, it's a king in charge, and when a woman is in charge, we take note of it, like in this text. And so I think for them, they're trying to fit her and the text within their understanding of the world and how governments and kingdoms work. And so they're in some ways like taking away some of her power because they think that's too much power for a woman to have, or that it's abnormal and possibly impossible for a woman to have that much power. And so we could interpret that as her being still a queen, but like an emissary. We could also interpret it as simply a amending the text as a whole and just saying that there is no Queen of Sheba. But regardless, there does seem to be this trying to fit her into their understanding 2,000 years ago of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a queen. And I think that in particular is the project that they're undertaking.
It seems like one of the beautiful gifts historically of the Jewish tradition is being able to see ancient rabbis struggling through a text in that way. It's like a glimpse at what do we do with this, and that's so honest as compared to just someone saying, "Oh, this must be written wrong. Here's the interpretation." It's a little bit more of like seeing the wrestle, and that's helpful to us in the modern world to just even say, oh, look at it's okay to see the wrestle. It's okay to be honest about the wrestle, or to wonder whatever in our context is difficult about this text. We get to wrestle with it too and see what we can find. Lisa, you looked like you were about to say something.
Well, I was going to acknowledge, because I do, like, as much as I want it to not be a gendered conversation, it does feel like it's worth noting that, like, powerful women typically do have to morph in different ways depending on who they're engaging with or who they're meeting or what's ever happening. I will never forget, like, when I was on staff at a church and the amount of comment cards we would get when there was a woman preaching versus when men would preach. And the comments would be around dress, hairstyle, distracting movements, too much skin, like different things that you're like, you have never once commented on a single other thing. So, like, there's something that there is in leadership and in powerful positions, something does happen. So I think that, and I want to give her, like, there is something about a woman who does try, like, of course she's got to do some trickster things. Of course. Like, that is part of figuring out how to navigate complicated situations. And so, like, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, she would have to be really smart. She would have to be really capable of navigating complex relationships, especially if there's more power or wealth or land or whatever everybody is trying to navigate. Like, all those things feel like certainly amplified in what she's got to be able to navigate.
Thinking about her as a leader and pulling out that strength, and then what you just said, Lisa, in that there's no reference in this text, in First Kings anyway, to her spouse. We don't know if she had a husband or not. She's not referenced in terms of children or her status of fertility or infertility. So all these things that women throughout the biblical text are almost always referenced in terms of their spouse, their children, or their fertility. And she's just here as a leader. And so thinking about how people make those comments to female pastors who are women who are leading, and they want to focus on kind of these female aspects of that person, as opposed to, here's a great leader, what can we learn from them? How can we engage with them intellectually or spiritually? I think she's a really great example of that kind of leader.
Is that also true in the Quran, that we don't have information about her family?
Absolutely. We do not have any information. Quran is not a book that goes into details about father, mother, sons, and all the story. But just coming off of what Rachel just said, it's just showing her an example of a leadership, a wonderful leader.
And not just a leader. I mean, her introduction that this, the bird does, says, I am coming from this place. It's called Saba. And Saba, Sheba, it's all like salam, shalom. So it's the same place. And there's a queen, there's a woman ruling over them. I mean, that's her introduction. So she is introduced to Sulaiman as a queen. So after that, I don't think, there's like, and she's introduced as a queen, and that she has everything. She has a vast kingdom. She has everything. And tradition says that it's someplace close to Yemen, maybe.
Well, that's
from the south,
to keep talking about is where, because it seems to be a mystery where Sheba is, and I'm curious what our traditions have sort of put around that? So your tradition, it would be
closer to Yemen. Yes.
Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Wilhelmina, do you have a place that's come up in your tradition where she's from?
Yeah, what I saw is somewhere around Yemen as well, somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula.
So I lived in the Horn of Africa, in Somaliland, and Djibouti, and Somalis would love to claim her, partly because she brought frankincense or spices, and one of the world's most rarest valued forms of frankincense is grown in the Somali regions, but also in Yemen. And so there's, people love to talk about that.
Right. So, I think it's very clear from Islam, the Islamic text that she is a queen. And it's not just any queen. It's got a great, vast kingdom, the kingdom that has everything, the kingdom that has gardens and this and that. She's wealthy. And then about mentioning her throne, that she has a magnificent throne. So Quran, right after that, of course, as I read, it talks about that Allah is the only one that has, the magnificent throne, but her throne must be something to mention, because it's brought to her, to to Sulaiman alayhi salam even before she comes. So it must be, a piece. So for us to look at, just from the leadership part, yes, she's a very wise leader. She's counseling, she's doing the gifts and all of that. But just from the power standpoint, I mean, she is, this woman controls a vast kingdom that is very resourceful and has a great, a magnificent throne. So of course her palace must be, magnificent also. So a lot of power in those few introductory, ayat.
I'm curious to talk a bit.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just need to do honor to my location in Africa, and also say, to go back to the previous topic, that Ethiopia would also love to claim her, and they have very significant traditions in their text even. The Kebra Nagas is one thing where she was actually part of her progeny, that she ended up getting pregnant with Solomon and having a child, became the ruling party of Ethiopia. So I just want to honor that tradition as well.
Which is also picked up by Ethiopian Jews for their own mythology, story, however you want to think of it.
Well, and I think that incorporates into what I was about to ask, which is sort of, wherever she's from, it's clear that she's not from where Solomon is from. She is from an outside place. And I'm curious about how that affects how we hold her. She's held up as this leader or this good guest, however we want to frame her. There's something good that she is doing and portraying, but she's coming from an outsider group. We talked in a previous episode about Pharaoh's wife or daughter in the different traditions, and how she is a part of a connection to Pharaoh's household, but she is playing the significant and elevated role. And how does it affect how we see this queen, that she's a queen of another land who seems to be seeing in a positive light in our texts?
No, I think, like I said, it's very simple that yes, it's a different kingdom, but even to Sulaiman alayhi salam, the way the bird is introducing, it's like, I'm bringing news that you don't know. So even in his power, in, Solomon's power, that he rules over such a vast kingdom, he doesn't know about this, distant land that, that has a woman ruling over them. So I think it's really interesting that yes, she's an outsider, but it's not outside, like some remote, part. It's a remote part. It's somewhere else, but it's a great kingdom. So it's kind of like a challenge to Sulaiman alayhi salam, I think, that, hey, you have a great kingdom, but there's another kingdom that you didn't know about.
And also, I think the fact that her faith is brought into the limelight all of a sudden when the bird comes to the Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, saying that she has this great kingdom, she is very powerful, but they're worshipping the sun.
Yep.
So that comes into play straight away.
Well, let me know what comes to mind for you for her being an outsider.
Yeah, I'm thinking about first. I'll say that the way that insider-outsider interactions play out in the Tanakh are different from how they might play out in the Jewish community today. And one of the things I think is interesting about that is that she's kind of coming in this long line of women from the outside coming and joining or being in good company with the members of this community. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any negative association with her being an outsider. It's more so about what her role, what her existence says about, if we look at the Talmud, women's roles in the world, if we look at the biblical text, Solomon, it seems to be not as much of a issue, the fact that she isn't a part of the people. If anything, it perhaps elevates these things even more, because if you're in the group, if you're part of the in-group, you're more likely to see things favorably. If you like your leader, you're more likely to see things that they do in a favorable light. And so to bring in this character from outside the people, you're able to be like, look, it's not just us. Not just other people also think he's pretty cool. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Rachel, I'm thinking about this section of Luke that you read where Jesus seems to be highlighting that she's an outsider. I'm curious what comes to mind for you about that dynamic of insider-outsider with her.
It's almost like he's saying a little bit like what Wilhelmina said of people on the inside. They should know that Solomon was great, or that Jesus was greater than Solomon. And yet in Jesus's context, they didn't. And it was this outsider who recognized that greatness. And so it's a rebuke, I think, to people who thought they were on the inside, who thought they were maybe closer or more righteous or holy than they were, because they were misunderstanding what that meant and what that should have looked like. I'm also struck by how she kind of has some words for Solomon as an outsider, praising him, praising his God, that other women have done previously in the Hebrew scriptures from the outside. I think of Rahab. She's another example who I don't need to tell the whole story, but she calls these Israelite spies back to their original mission, which was to destroy her people. And so she's got a profound word, a prophetic word from the outside. And so it makes me think about, what do outsiders have to speak in terms of prophetically into my tradition, into what I understand. And that's been my experience actually with engaging, especially in intertextual conversations, because I do feel like people who don't share my tradition from the inside have ways of speaking into it that convict and challenge and encourage. So that's all the ways that my thoughts go with what Jesus said about that insider-outside dynamic.
Lisa, you made a face when Rachel said the word rebuke, and I'm curious if you want to...
I don't know, probably just in my face for rebuking in general. The story is I think there's always something to be said for a check-in. Like, there's something about assuming you're right, or that your tradition is right. And if you are not actually outward focused enough to recognize other folks and what their reflection back to you of what your tradition is doing or saying. So like in terms of a Christian, like the cacophony of sound of like, well, we're right. But like, if you are not checking in with folks who, like, I would argue immigrants and folks who are oppressed, or folks who find themselves in spaces where they are not the majority. If you're not doing a check-in with them and hearing feedback, or hearing like, oh, this is how it is impacting me, this is how it's being reflected, would be like that is I think that's critical work for us to do, because if you're only in your own space with your own people and your own sound, you make it feel like it's something that it's potentially not. And I think it's a good caution, if we're too insulated into our own spaces, to not actually be aware of, oh, this is actually what is happening outside of our own personal little bubble.
Which again, that seems to elevate the Queen of Sheba then as somebody who could go toe to toe with Solomon's wisdom and be an outsider voice that he could hear, that could influence his leadership, and what it was to sort of have this woman maybe sent to him by God to be that voice for him and to keep hearing other perspectives. We close all of these conversations with what we call a takeaway. So that doesn't need to be like the one lesson from this passage, because we hold that there are multiple things we can take from these stories, multiple lessons. But it's a way of saying we just had a winding conversation about a lot of things. What is one thing that we want to remember, or maybe think about, or wrestle with, or investigate some more, or maybe do based on the conversation? Because it can help both us and our listeners to just hear a few of those nuggets as a way of closing the conversation. So when you feel ready, what is something you want to remember or think about or do from today's conversation?
I think I would be more curious as to why she is not held in such esteem, and then, with Muslim tradition, she is. So now I'm curious to find out, why, and if it is just, as Lisa said, just, a woman versus a male power, and, she's scrutinized more. Maybe it's just that, I don't know.
I kind of wanted to add to what Alia just said, that again, like I was not aware of this other point of view from different traditions, and I would be in my own study, I would like to find out how other traditions, why she isn't. And also from Muslims tradition point of view, I think that this is something we as women need to embrace, that they are examples of great leadership, and one of them is Queen of Sheba as a woman. And like Sister Ali had said earlier, that the Quran does say that she was a female, and so like sometimes in a Muslim society, you may feel like, oh my goodness, no, we are not getting talked about enough. There's not enough positive examples, but right there in the Quran, there is an example of a woman leadership who was on her A game.
I think something that I want to do is to visit the passages in the Quran that we've heard about, because I'm always amazed when other traditions create more fleshed out characters than my own, because we obviously can read a lot of character into the text in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, but it's still, for me, feels a little flat, and I'm just really curious to see like what it looks like when she's a more fleshed out character.
With legs and ankles.
With legs and ankles, yes.
Yeah. I want to think more about this guest host, insider outsider dynamic, and I'll just say that.
Okay, we didn't talk about this, but I would be lying if I didn't say this has been like stuck in my brain. Also, like I'm irritated that I'm stuck on it. So like just fully the whole thing. But Alia, when you read, I heard Satan and I was like, wait, what? Now I'm just curious about like what that, like in Islam, what that, tell me more about what that is. And I'm sure that's another whole episode, but like that is what I've been thinking about.
No, just what Fozia said, that was how she was introduced, that she's a queen and these people worship the sun and they are misguided, and they're misguided by the shaitan, by Satan. So that's how, it's the introduction of their faith not being in line. They're not monotheistic people. They're worshiping the sun.
Which is, I think it is interesting as I think about my takeaway, I love the elevation that happened of her example of being a good leadership example for anyone to follow, being a good example of wisdom for anyone to follow, and even putting in context what Lisa just brought us to of like starting in this position of being a good ruler perhaps, but also being misaligned or not following what she needed to follow, and that there was still sort of this redeemable, that's the best word I can come up with, like thread to what she was doing and what she was seeking and where she finds herself. And there's something about that just makes me really, she seems very human and very elevated at the same time in a way that seems like a lovely example for a lot of leaders to keep seeking and to keep exploring and to keep responding with that curiosity. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Searching the Sacred as we explored the Queen of Sheba, and we hope that you keep listening as we talk about all of these women in our texts. And thank you so much to our guests. Thank you to Alia and Fosia and Wilhelmina and Rachel for being here today. And thank you for joining Searching the Sacred.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by Les FM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.